Okay, good morning. Welcome everyone, and thanks for jumping on. I'm sure there's a few of you, or a few people just about to join. So just because it's 31 minutes past, we'll get going. So today's a really interesting and uh, relevant and front of mind topic. I know for a lot of the peers in the housing association sector and local government sectors that we have um, from joining today. So really excited to announce with you uh, the latest and greatest functionality that Microsoft have been providing and have been developing to help housing associations, councils, and organisations all over the world in achieving net zero and effectively helping and leveraging technology capability to improve sustainability. So just got a couple of bits to get through this morning, and I'll then hand over to Ollie Sinclair, who's on from Crimson, to walk you through some of that Microsoft technology capability. Um, so just before just before we get into the main event, those of you that might have been on some of the events previously know that I unfortunately have a taste for cheesy quizzes at the start of all of these sessions. So um, just as a bit of trivia, just to make sure we're all awake and to warm you up, the first question, and feel free to just use the chat and shout out in the chat. The first question is, by what year does the housing sector has committed to being net zero? So what year does the housing sector have to be net zero by? Um, Hopefully everyone knows that. Just a nice, easy one to get us going. Okay, perfect. I can see some right answers. We've done our homework. We've done our homework. Okay, so by what year does do effectives of the social housing sector committed to having all properties C rating or above? See if anyone knows this one. I don't think it's any harder, but might be a little bit. Close, close, I think. Yeah, can see a right answer just popped in there. Nice, nice. People are on the ball. Okay, cool. So question number three, two-part question. So the housing sector, and the housing sector I mean is the housing sector as a whole for the first part of the question, in the UK contributes to what fraction of the UK's greenhouse gases? So that's everything housing, not just social housing sector. But what contribution in the UK does the housing sector as a whole, as a fraction, contribute to the greenhouse gases? And then the two part of the question is then what percentage of that fraction is social housing's carbon footprint and contribution to those greenhouse gases. And of course, we couldn't actually do a sustainability quiz or session without mentioning the fantastic Greta Thunberg. But this is the most difficult question of all. Last year, randomly, she got on stage as part of one of her talks and sang a particular song on karaoke with I understand to be her boyfriend. So I was just wondering if anyone knew what song Greta Thunberg sung. Hey, I think we've across the board got right answers. So well done, guys. And sorry, I know it's very cheesy, but hopefully it'll keep you awake and making sure that you're all warmed up for the session. So it was 2050 was the year of net zero that the housing sector signed up to. I think all of you got that. 2030 is the year in which all social housing properties need to be C rating or above. Don't know whether you guys have been packing in your stock condition surveys at the moment, but I know a lot of our customers have been. So in fact, the housing sector as a whole in the UK contributes to 1/5 of the greenhouse gases and emissions that the UK emits, and social housing contributes to 10% of that. And of course, Greta Thunberg sang, "Rick Astley is never going to give you up." So not sustainability related, but a bit of fun. So there we go. Just as a quick intro to get everyone on the sustainability mindset, and impressed that everyone's already started to do some research and thinking about what responsibilities we in housing have aligned to sustainability. So um, some of you I know are familiar faces, and delighted to have you back again this morning for this sustainability breakfast session. Um, just for those of you that haven't engaged with Crimson before, and that are new joiners, Crimson as a business is a Microsoft consultancy and a Microsoft Gold partner who specialize in housing across the Microsoft stack. So Dynamics 365, Power Platform, Power BI, SharePoint, Office 365, AI, and whether it's working with your existing, using solutions to enhance your experience with your existing housing management solution, or tactically replacing parts of it, or doing a complete replacement. Crimson works with a number of leading brands in the housing sector to effectively do that. Some of those who are existing customers actually didn't know that we do a lot of work as well with the private home building sector, universities, and local regional government. Um, and really, our solutions, certainly in housing space, we, as well as the experience of working with some fantastic brands in social housing, um, we've got what we describe as accelerated solutions on the Microsoft stack that allow us to engage at a quicker velocity and give you capability from a standing start rather than working from scratch. So talk a little bit more about those later. But what do we actually do within in the sector? Helping you deliver intelligent customer experiences, whether that's digital interfaces, new portal solutions, new mobile self-serve solutions, whether it's driving efficiency as per optimized business processes across your contact centers, your housing operations teams, your repairs teams, and back office, and finally helping you guys get meaningful data out of the solutions that you work with, and being able to not just look at those data statistics, but do something about them. So, as I've said, myself and Ollie are your hosts for this morning. I've just got a couple of slides to go through with you all before we get into the main event, where Ollie's going to walk you through, as I say, some of the Microsoft technology and capability that is hot off the press. Microsoft, for those of you that aren't in the Microsoft world, did an Envision event, which is their annual UK event, where, believe it or not, they all have a hoorah and showcase their latest and greatest technology. Gareth Southgate was there, I think, as the keynote to give a talk on the future of leadership and leadership in tough situations. And one of the key focuses, as you expect from I think Microsoft and everyone at the moment, was around sustainability. And the stuff that we'll be showing you today is, as I say, intended for multiple different types of organization, but is fresh technology from Microsoft that has just been launched, which we're delighted to show you and walk you through today. So some of you may already be aware of this particular infographic, which enlists the 17 sustainability goals that the UN has set us as a planet, not just as a sector, not just as a country, but everything aligned to these 17 goals is what effectively has been underpinning organisation sustainability plans, actions, recovery, and everyone effectively who is starting to take sustainability really seriously would need to think about how much each of one of these 17 areas affects their world and what they're doing around actually making sustainability a thing within their organization, within their personal lives, but also built into their DNA of their sustainability plan. So some really hard and home hitting points within those 17 areas, and some of those definitely more relevant and prevalent for the housing sector and technology sector from our side as well. So some of you may already be well underway, or may even be in the second iteration or third iterations of your sustainability planning. I know some of you, just looking at some of your roles that you guys have come from, all coming from the housing and local government sector. Um, uh, Effectively, there's already been a big play, as I said, with the announcements in the quiz earlier around commitments that the social housing sector has to make around, being net zero by 2050, having C or more energy efficient, C, B, A grade energy efficient properties by 2030. Um, and like I say, I know, having looked at a lot of the customers that we work with in the social housing space, there's already been action that's been taken and planning that's already been delivered around sustainability for organisations within the social housing sector. Um, this is just really a slide that we've used when talking about sustainability, when helping organisations just at a very principle level, either help that with that initial plan or revalidation of the plan that already exists. And Ollie's then going to talk later about how you can use technology also to leverage and drive through that plan. But the four pillars, so we can condense the 17 UN um, sustainability goals into what we would describe as four pillars, I think, for the sector, which is what are we doing from an economic perspective to improve the utilization of the assets that we're doing. So again, looking at actually what we're doing around making sure our energy, the property and energy ratings are there for 2030. What are we doing around operational efficiencies, minimizing the waste that we use? Actually, how can we remove waste within the processes that we have at the moment, not just from green processes, but processes as a whole within the organization to make us more efficient? Giving back, and from a natural perspective, what can we do to actually, conserve the environments and the areas that we're either building new developments in for new shared ownership and affordable living, but also sustain and improve the natural environments of the existing stock and areas and communities that we already have across our housing association. And lastly, across both your colleague and customer base, social impact. So, what are we doing to look at diversity, inclusion, and looking at poverty, and vulnerable living as well, and effectively well-being within the community. So, so effectively, one of the key things, breaking it down into 5 steps. If you guys haven't already, or feeling that you need to just go through a second iteration of the existing plan that you guys have, we've broken those into 5 steps as part of the planning that you might look to do as part of a sustainability plan, which is first talk and engage. So assess effectively, get together what we describe as a sustainability board, a group, a chair, to make sure that you're actually discussing and talking about, what you understand sustainability to be and what the sustainability goals within the sector mean for you as an organization. Break that into, as you would always do with any good plan, prioritization and assessing what actually might be needed in terms of ordering some of the goals that you're doing. Making the commitment to making all your properties C listed energy efficient rating or less is no small feat as a sector, um, and is obviously a long term strategic play that is needed. Um, but actually, what can we do as the incremental gains and prioritization of quick wins as well as longer term objectives, and assess and prioritizing those? Commit and collaborate. So where you need to form partnerships and action that list and that prioritization, collaborate with the right people, engage your customers, your tenants, your colleagues, your partners, but most importantly, making sure that you're measuring and reporting that and understanding how you're performing. And hopefully, some of the technology that Ollie's going to show later will show you how you can start to actually track some of the key metrics and actions that you're delivering. And lastly, it's really important to make sure that, as is with any plan like this and any sort of big strategic play that you are having on sustainability, that you're continuing, like every organization, to learn from the workings and the actions that have been taken, that you're communicating out what impact they're having, and that you're taking educational information from updates. The sustainability progress of organizations and us as a planet continues to move, and that you're taking and incorporating those learnings into that sustainability plan to improve and enhance yours. So just a little bit there to talk to you about then on the sustainability planning and a refresher of what actually are the sustainability goals of us as a planet. Before I hand over now to Ollie to talk to you a little bit about Microsoft's view of sustainability, and then actually what that means from a technology point of view and what tools you might be able to leverage to support you with that. So over to you, Ollie.
Cheers. Thank you, Jordan. That sort of segues quite nicely into, okay, that's really from a sort of a global standpoint, what we're expected to sort of understand from a sustainability perspective. There is a little bit of a spin on that Microsoft has taken. So instead of those pillars that Jordan was looking at, they've sort of reduced that down really to 3. And really of those 3, they're massively into at the moment the assess stage, because effectively if we can't get a good understanding or a common model of what where we are today with our carbon emissions, and how we can calculate those in a collective manner, then really you kind of you need to find out where you start to know how to get to where you want to get to. So if we just click on the slide one more. So when we go down into the assess side of things, really the 3 elements of assessing are sort of aiming for accuracy. Now, within the housing sector, that can be quite difficult because obviously a lot of what we are in terms of the carbon emissions, we're not directly responsible for sort of the use of those. So obviously they are your tenants in their houses burning fossil fuels or consuming electricity, and therefore we're not really in a massive amount of control, and we don't have the information to be able to estimate or well, not estimate, but actually know exactly how much carbon is being emitted by these activities. But there are a few things that we can try and get there, try and get closer. EPC ratings, as Jordan was saying earlier, around housing stock condition surveys. EPC rating is a nice indicator of realistically how much carbon is being emitted per household, and then we can do some calculations on that. So hey, look, it's not perfect, but we are trying to aim for accuracy. But if we can use some of this information that we have available for our stock, we can get to some level of accuracy before we go into the utopian world of IoT and everything's connected. There's obviously questions about privacy on how far can we go in terms of recording these metrics, but I'll leave that discussion up to someone else. But effectively, we're aiming for accuracy, and we're trying to record and report on the impact of that. So that would be in the 3 scopes, and I'll talk about the 3 scopes of carbon emissions a little bit later on, and then leveraging the expertise. So there's in terms of technology expertise, that there'll be the likes of Microsoft and Crimson being the partners. But obviously there are expertise and potentially people that we would need to pull in to make sure that we're doing the right thing or focusing on the right area. So assess is absolutely important, and Microsoft has really identified that as a starting point. But going on from assess, there is the next part, which is really the accelerate. Now, that's once we know where we are, what are we going to do to be able to tackle the delta between the carbon emissions we're doing now and how far away we are from net zero or whatever we like to call it. It's broken into sort of 4 different areas. You've got the standard operation efficiencies. So this would be smart technology within your offices, or technology to help your sort of vehicles if you have repairs, or your housing officers with their vehicles. There's things that technology can leverage to not only track but also encourage you to drive better, or drive smarter, or drive more efficiently, etc. So there's a lot around operational efficiencies. Specifically in the housing sector, that there isn't too much in terms of, I guess, ecosystems, because that really is around assessing the weather and how that's going to impact, or environmental factors and how that's going to impact it. So there might not be too much there, but certainly from a carbon, adopting smart energy, absolutely. There can be incentives and there can be ways in which we can start rolling out, the retrofitting of your housing stock with solar panels and heating as well. And then obviously the waste side of things as well. So again, slightly less on that, but there are things to consider with the Accelerate. So all of these areas, Microsoft and the partner ecosystem are looking at technologies to aid and enable the acceleration of getting to net zero. So really good news. And then the next slide is around transform. So once we know we've accelerated, once we've got that technology, how can we actually use that and use that technology? And it's going to be things like, removing your footprint completely from certain areas. So again, from a fleet management perspective at housing, or from a void stock management perspective, is there anything that we can do to do that? So there's a couple of things that Microsoft are looking at, and again, being supported by the partner sector. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back really today and talk about the assess side. So if we click on, just to remember what we were talking about, it's really aiming for accuracy in recording and reporting. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about scope. This is the contentious item, really. So if we move on one slide, sorry. So emission scopes. Whether you guys have sort of seen this or not, I've seen it represented, certainly for housing associations, sometimes interpreted different ways. Now, for this demonstration, I'm sort of taking the concept that scope 1 is obviously your direct emissions. So this would obviously be, actually burning fossil fuels. So anything within your offices or anything that you're in control of. So your fleet of cars, your vehicles, whatever it may be, or, communal heating in areas that you can control. So that for me is scope 1. And then obviously scope 2 is around the purchased electricity for heating. If it's electrical heating, or your sort of your housing association's headquarters, so the purchasing of that electricity is really the scope 2. Scope 3 then is, the definition is indirect emissions that you're not in control of. So my interpretation of that is the actual your housing stock. The majority of your housing stock would be scope 3 if you are, even for social housing, and obviously for direct lettings, etc., because you're not really in control of the use of the emissions, so the boilers, and the use of that. Then all of that for me would be in scope 3. So that's how I've represented it within the demonstration that I'm going to get to in a sec. The reason why I say this contentious item, because it's potentially depends on how you read the scopes. Some people may put the boiler consumption of gas being scope 1 that you're directly involved with. So and again, it depends on where you draw the line. If you are not renting a property out and it is in your stock and it's a void property, does that then go from scope 3 directly into scope 1? Because then we are in control of using that. So again, there's lots to discuss on that one. But again, I'm making the presumption here in this demonstration that really scope 3 is your housing stock. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is really sort of what is Microsoft giving us for this area. They've actually created what's known as Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability. So this is a new app, and what it really does is that it will allow us to give accurate, comprehensive, and real-time view of the environmental footprint across all of the emission sources. So all of the ones on the previous slide, not just related to CO2, but it should provide users a visibility to see a total emission footprint, and using the centralized data, we can actually have a common format for this data. So whether it be emissions through your logistics, whether it's through the housing stock, whether it's all of these different elements of your carbon footprint, is all actually combined into one common model, which then can be reported on, and obviously then reported at that higher level to say, okay, our realistic carbon footprint for this year was X, and then we can start to look at publishing on that. So it is industry aligned sustainability targets, and that the whole idea of this would be to provide sort of actionable insights and help you come to an understanding of the reduction strategies that would be useful in the business. And again, reporting on those reduction strategies and how well we're doing, and how close we're getting to net zero. So there's a lot of detail in this application. It is currently at preview, ready for general availability on June. So we are in the final throes of the preview, and we'll be looking to sort of then start onboarding people onto the product once it has been released in June. Because it is a first release, it's not going to solve all of our problems. It's not going to be able to solve all of our calculations, but it's certainly a massive step in the right direction in terms of assisting and aiding us to be able to calculate and record carbon emissions through an organization. So what I'll do now is I'll probably take control of the screen and show you some demonstrations. Yeah. Okay, George, just gives a thumbs up that you can see the screen. Brilliant. Okay, so for anybody that is familiar with Microsoft Dynamics 365 or the Power Platform, this navigation or this screen should be quite familiar to you guys. Surprise, surprise, the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability application is built on the Power Platform and does use Dataverse for its data store, which is really, really good, because any other stuff that you're doing with Crimson or implementing with Dynamics 365, it's all the same stuff, which is really, really cool. So just to give you a quick explanation of what we've got here, down the left-hand side is a set of modules and a navigation pane to take us through the right areas. What I've started off is the settings area, and I've started with the company profile. So surprise, surprise, with the sustainability application, the things that we would need to define are really common things like, what is your profile? What is the company structure? What are your facilities, or what are your regions of housing stock that we are going to be reporting on? Obviously, this would need to be set up right at the get-go. What I've done here is I've kind of copied and pasted some of the demo data. So the demo data originally was Contoso, which is Microsoft's famous company that doesn't exist. It's now changed to a coffee company. So what I've done is I've relabeled those Crimson, but as you can see, this scenario, we're a global housing association in all areas. So what you can see here is that you can select some of these industries, and that will enable some of the metrics and reporting to be specific. And there is, the closest thing that I can find is there is a real estate activity element to that. So some of the other settings that are useful to know, where we've got in here, there are an immense amount of detail that's come out of, what are the greenhouse gases that we are trying to track and record, right down to the specific carbon elements or the HFCs. There's 68 by default in here. which have a GWP factors associated to them. This is obviously can be edited, but again, it's come from industry standard. So these calculations are pretty standard. You also have unit groups. So depending upon how you want to make reportings, again, we've kept this relatively straightforward. Kept the energy at megawatts, the distance in meters, the volume in liters, and the weight and mass in metric tons of CO2. So there's some other things around regional mappings, which I won't get onto, but effectively, these are your settings that you would need to set up. Now, what does the Cloud for Sustainability app give you? Well, it gives you the ability to ingest data from a variety of sources. And what it does there, I've got one of my sections here is around data. So if I click on activity data, what you'll see on this screen is the types of activity that happens at each scope. So obviously scope 1, you've got fugitive, industrial, mobile, and stationary combustion. So obviously from a housing association perspective, it might be quite high in the mobile combustion area in terms of your fleets. And then obviously scope 2 being the purchased elements, cooling, heat and steam, probably not, but certainly electricity would be quite high up on the agenda of capturing that information. Now, what's really good is if we were to have a look at some of this information, so if I view the activity, what you can see is that I've got my London fleet has some distances, so they're activities that have done at certain times. So back in 2020, they traveled that far, and there was that much fuel quantity. So raw data can come in about the activities of certain things. Now, this is really, really useful because we can use this information to be able to calculate in a consistent manner the actual the combustion and the amount of CO2 produced for all of these different types of activities. So the way that actually happens is around the calculations and the models. So what I will do now is just take you through an example of how we do the model calculations. So in here, we've got a set of models. And I'll just go to the mobile combustion one, because that's the one we've really been talking around. So Microsoft allows you to create new models and also view what type of models to actually adhere to. So if you can see on this scenario, we've actually got a calculation where if the source is mobile combustion and the vehicle is on the road, then we're actually doing a different type of fuel calculation than if they weren't on the road, and the different fuel calculations based on that. So you can get really specific in terms of how you're calculating your CO2 and how you want to do that. The way that we can get to the calculation and doing this model is through something called emission factors. Now, emission factors, again, are a guideline of how you can really calculate the emissions for a certain type of activity. So the emissions are the CO2 released for a certain type of vehicle that's traveling a certain distance. You can actually calculate that, and you can have emission factors for that. At the moment, there's a number of obviously government government sort of initiatives that give you some calculations, so you don't have to start from scratch with this stuff. You can import all of the different types of factors. The UK GHG ones, you've got some emission factors here, and I'll just go through one of them. So if we were to do, for example, petrol cars, so on-road petrol vehicles, you have the units in miles, and there's a document reference on the UK GHG, and that will give you some of the calculations around the CH4 and the NO2 actually emitted from a petrol passenger car. So having all of these calculations means that actually what we need to do, one, make sure these calculations are correct and reflective of what we want to be capturing, but once they are set up, they're set up and good to go. Then it's just a fact of how do we consume the activity data within this system to be able to calculate that. If you are at a certain level where you don't have the activity data, but you are, say, you're trying to just put in the amount of emissions, so sort of kind of ignoring the calculations, you already know the emissions, or you don't have the raw activity data, but you do have a summation of the emissions. So what I'm thinking is in scope 3, when we're talking about housing stock, we don't really have the activity levels. So we can't come in here and import or link a load of activities for our housing stock. But what we do have is the EPC ratings, which give us each year a rough guesstimate on the tonnage of CO2 emitted. Now, this application is flexible enough that we can actually quite simply import those emission calculations, and that will then be included into the scope of what we're trying to report on. So the combination of scope 1, 2, and 3, scope 1 and 2, you may have activities. Good example that I went through, the vehicles on the road, you've got those activities, you can get that in, you can get a really good calculation on your CO2. Maybe the scope 3 stuff, you don't have the activity, but what you do have is a summation of the emissions. So what I'm going to take you through now is how we actually get data in, and I'm doing it for the example of that scope 3, where we've got a set of stock where we know the EPC ratings, so we know how much tonnage of carbons were emitted at a certain time frame. So the way to do that would be, again, looking at scope 3, I've chosen to put the housing stock at downstream leased assets. That might be right, that might not be. I'm looking at the scope categories, that seemed to be the logical one where we would put this information. So what you can see here, there's a couple of elements already in the system. What I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new connection for consuming more data about my housing stock emissions for downstream leased assets. So I'm going to manage a connection, and this would come into my data connections area. If the demo gods are being kind, that is. Okay, so at the moment, I've only got one activity data, which is the demo one around fridge data. So please ignore that. But what I will need to do is create a new data connection. And as said before, you have your options to import activity data. So the fleet mileage, we could select that and chuck in the activity data. What I'm going to have a look at is the pre-calculated emissions. So I'm going to enter the pre-calculated emissions for my upstream leased assets. Now, I'm going to use Excel because I've just got an Excel spreadsheet. Funnily enough, I don't have, Crimson doesn't have any housing stock, unfortunately, with EPC ratings. But if you had your EPC ratings in your housing management system or within your asset management systems, you can, through connections, to be able to create a connection to that data. So if I clicked on more connections and went forward, you would then have, connecting to Dataverse, connecting to SQL databases, or if you have custom connectors linked to your housing association, your housing management system, brilliant. We would be able to capture some of that information. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and load up an Excel file that is a dummy of our emissions. Just going to quickly find that. So this would allow you, even if you didn't have a centralized repository for that data at the moment, if it was in Excel, you would be able to import this information manually, or if it's on a SharePoint, you would be able to point to the SharePoint location, and that information is going. So I'm choosing my housing stock EPC calcs that we did, and I would go next to map the fields. Now, the really cool thing about the sustainability app is that it is through Dataverse. So we do have the data flow capabilities, which this is based on, and we are able to very, very quickly grab some data, grab some information, and be able to transform that into useful information into the system. So I'm just going to quickly select my data. And in a Blue Peter moment, obviously this data is perfectly acceptable in terms of the structure, because we're using this as demonstration. But again, in this area, you would be able to then transform your information or your data using the Power Query to be able to make it useful. But again, I won't step on too much around how we convert the data in here. That's probably for another day. But as a data analyst, you would be quite au fait with doing this sort of thing. But what we're doing really is just mapping the fields of that spreadsheet into the fields in which we're going to then consume the data. So what it's doing now, it's just fixing my issues, computing the schema, and then it will give me a representation of the data that's going to be mapped across. So brilliant. Okay, so I've got a couple of things mapped here. My importantly, the CO2 emissions are mapped, so I know I'm going to get the right information through. What you can do is schedule a refresh, so I could actually refresh. If, say, for example, if somebody else was in control of the spreadsheet and they were populating this, or it was again from a data source that was slightly smarter, SQL data source or something, you would be, for each data connection, be able to supply a data refresh. So this could refresh beginning of every month, beginning of every week, however you're doing, whether it be activity data or emission data, this information can be consumed at appropriate times. I'm just going to say, yeah, once a week, I'm going to do that. And you can obviously, if this is a static spreadsheet, but the data is updated, then certainly you can start, you remove the data that was previously imported the last time. So you just get fresh numbers of the same report if that's what you want to do. I'm just going to go ahead and just call that EPC calcs and create that connection. So again, if this was connecting to some data, you would only have to do this once, set the frequency, and then you would just be safe in the knowledge that the data will continuously be consumed and be calculated in the regular fashion. So, that that data connection is now scheduled to run. What we'll just quickly do is just refresh. And hopefully these emissions will start coming through. Not yet. Piece with a few errors. No, seems to not have worked. Demo quads are not friendly to me, but effectively what you would be able to see would be some actual emissions data or new emissions data coming through that would be associated, very similar to things like cooling, where you would actually see the raw information around the CO2 emitted. So that's really the first part of the demonstration, is showing you how to import the data and get that data pushed across. The second part of this demonstration is around, okay, so now we've got the data in there. what does that actually mean? How can we see, what our carbon footprint is, and what are the areas, and what's the assessment? So what they've got in here is a couple of areas where you've got some dashboards and some analysis on the carbon emissions. So I'm going to take you through to a dashboard, which will show you based on the reporting year. So we're doing last year's numbers. It will then calculate all of those emissions that you've loaded in, that converted from your activities, and show you your total emissions, where you are from the previous year, and a couple of other things, which obviously can be tweaked and changed, and depending upon what you want to see. But what you can see here is very typically, because we're saying our housing stock is scope 3, then the vast majority, what you'd expect to see, the vast majority of the emissions that is responsible for a housing association isn't that scope 3. But that's not to say that these things aren't important, and these things we need to look at in terms of the other scopes. What you can do is filter on the scope and work out, okay, what are the total emissions of the year, and you can see that these emissions are going up as the company is growing, as the stock is increasing, or as offices are being created. So we need to start having a look at a plan, understanding where we can make savings in these specific scopes. So looking at the total emissions, what you can see, if you can click on the certain areas, so Crimson Corp, the New York office, is really where a lot of our scope 1 consumption is. Maybe that's because that's where our head office is. Surprise, surprise. But what you can see is an understanding of some of the data you've got, including the percentage of renewable energy that's been consumed, as well as the distribution of that energy as well. So there's a lot in here that allows us to really analyze and assess the information that we've loaded in, that raw data that we've got, and what we need to do to get better. So that, along with the analysis, is a different sort of a view of the same dashboard, sort of shows you some really powerful insights into your data. One of the major things, once we've obviously got this data in there and we understand where we need to go to, well, now we need to have a look at the actions. What are we going to do to reduce that carbon footprint down? So one of the areas which Microsoft really useful to allow us to do that, just quickly just show you a different slide element on that, which is the analysis of the emissions. You've got scope 1, 2, and 3. You've got your monthly emissions, and then you've got emissions by source. So obviously that downstream leased assets, which is where I put the housing stock, is quite a large element. You can see, and apologies, there's no map visuals for the European demonstration, but you can see some annual trends around the different scopes and where we're trying to get to. The numbers haven't been loaded in for 2022 yet, but once they do, then obviously then we will see where we are with those emissions. But now we've got those emissions, now we understand it. Okay, how are we going to reduce it? How are we going to tackle it? We're going to do that through scorecards. Again, the demo gods are not very kind to me, so I'm going to take you through another scorecard. So effectively what we would see here is a scorecard very similar to this scorecard, but it would be inside the application. Now, with scorecards, what you would be able to do is have goals around the percentage of, maybe percentage completion of something, or the volume of something compared to your targets. So obviously for us, in the Crimson Housing, although we know we've got until 2030, we've made a corporate decision to actually get EPC ratings to 100% by 2025. And therefore, we've actually had a look at that. And what you can see is that you can have sub goals that relate to this. So the way that we're going to get to those EPC ratings are by a number of factors in terms of retrofitting. So at the moment, we've got 20,000 retrofits of an estimated 45,000 that we need to do by December. And again, those heat pump installations, we've already done 201, but we need to get to 800 by 2025. So we're quite behind on our fabrics retrofits for our houses, but these two scores combined will hopefully get us up to the right EPC rating and to get us from 55% up to 100% of our stock. So what you can see here is a way in which we can use the reporting and analysis to drive the initiative, and then still track those initiatives by the raw numbers that are coming out the system. So we know from the fact that we've loaded those EPC rating within the sustainability app. Well, that's brilliant. We can now report on that and work out how many of those are actually in the right rating, and what we need to do to capture that. So I've talked on quite a lot about the application. There's loads there, but it is really, really powerful application. But again, it takes a while to get your head around exactly all of the different types of models and calculations. But I thought I'd just give you a brief overview of what we've got there.
Thanks, Ollie. Much appreciated. So, guys, as I say, if anyone's got any, as we normally do at this point, if anyone's got any questions around the app itself and what Ollie's just walked through there, fantastic capability and engine from Microsoft to be able to, input, ingest, and take data and report on it with regards to how you're performing. Microsoft are just in the process of, as Ollie said, putting it out to general availability and sorting pricing. But if anyone's got any, further questions or follow-ups, we've got a little bit of time just now to take questions. So I'll open the floor if anybody wants to ask a question. I'm happy, Ollie, just to sort of start the running. Is your how difficult or how I suppose advanced are the connector capabilities within this app? So if I'm thinking specifically about some of the people on the call who either have, repairs management systems, housing management systems, or data locked in, databases, what sort of connectors do you get out of the box, and how easy would it be to hook it up to existing housing management systems and systems that have got that data in?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of the sustainability app being a part of Dataverse. Anything that you would want to connect to, you have 500 plus connectors out the box within Dataverse and within the Power Platform to be able to connect to information. You use exactly the same connectors to be able to push this information in here as well. If, for example, you've got a bespoke connection, say to a legacy system or to elements that you've got housing association, APIs, but you don't have a connector within Dataverse or within Power Platform, you can create custom connectors that you can then plug into this application to be able to consume that information. So a really, really, really powerful list of information that can get across there. That's absolutely the beauty. Microsoft have seen that and said, okay, what do we do really, really well? Well, actually, we're kind of the sticky glue with a platform that allows us to view, transform, and present data in a smart way. They've now just put a face on that in terms of sustainability, added in the really cool features around calculations, but it all stems from getting that data into this system. So they've really, really made sure that they're on par with what you'd expect in terms of data connection.
Fantastic. And I think what we've said, or what you told me before the call, is anyone who's sort of looking to get involved, typically how we as a call to action with as Crimson would work is we would deliver an initial sort of half-hour assessment and call to understand where you might be on your sustainability journey and ask those right sorts of questions as to where the data sits, and then move into a a sort of 2 to 3 hour workshop to understand scope, requirements, and what would be required. So if anybody was thinking, how do we get involved, it's exactly that. And feel free to drop us any questions on it. So just very quickly, just a few last things. Some of you may be aware that we do other things outside of just the sustainability app in the Microsoft space. And some of you might be looking to get involved in Microsoft capability, full stop. We run free workshops around understanding what Dynamics and Power Platform and Microsoft capabilities can help housing associations with. And these are the sorts of proof of concepts outside of the sustainability piece that organisations and housing associations run with us. So we'll share these slides off the back of the session as part of the follow-up. But if you do have any final questions, guys, do let us know. Out of interest, I don't know if anyone wants to give us a thumbs up or back in the chat or say anything. It'd be great to get your feedback on the session, and also to see if any of you are going to Manchester and the housing event at the end of June, where we'll be as well. Cool. Okay. Quiet morning. Quiet morning. Perfect. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. Like I say, this technology is fresh off the press, so like I say, Microsoft only sort of really showcased it to non-partners and sort of globally last week. So some good capability there. And if anyone's interested in sort of having a follow-up conversation of how they might get involved, do let us know. We really appreciate any feedback you've got on these sessions on how we improve the running of them. And if anyone is in attendance in Manchester at the end of June, would be really keen on sort of grabbing a coffee with you at our stand, or talking about this or any more information that we're working with housing associations on the Microsoft tech. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for your comments, guys. Really great to have you this morning. I'll hang on just for a couple more minutes, but if that's everything from everyone, really appreciate your time. Do drop us a feedback note, and we'll see you in about 6 to 8 weeks' time when we'll be running our next session. Thanks so much. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.